Alright, welcome. Today we're going to be taking apart a Razer Blade Pro RZ09-0166 series gaming laptop. And this is the 01663E53 with the GTX 1080 and 4K display. Alright, so to begin we're just going to need a small Torx bit. This is a T5, and once we get into the internals it's probably going to be a small Phillips bit. And just be advised, we're going to be leaving the display assembly complete, so we're not going to be taking that apart. And also the most likely the touchpad and keyboard will keep as an assembly here. But otherwise we'll open up the case and show you how to upgrade or replace most of the parts on the inside. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is turn it over. And all along the perimeter are the T5 screws, so we'll go ahead and remove those. Alright, once you get those perimeter Torx screws out, we're going to need to remove a couple small Phillips screws underneath the foot here. They do have rubber plugs that you can try to work out before you get in there with the screwdriver, but easiest way is just to pull up and peel back the foot, and that'll allow you to get to those small Phillips bits. And of course, if you do peel it back, just have a small bit of glue to help hold that foot back down. Okay, so once you have those two hidden Phillips bit screws, you should be able to get a fingernail underneath this bottom case where it separates from the palm rest, and just pop it up a little bit, and you're going to move it toward the front of the laptop. So just pull it away a little bit laterally, and then that'll allow you to remove the bottom case. You can see the little catches there, so you definitely have to pull it just a little bit that way to free it from the palm rest. Alright, so let's take a look. That's interesting. So they have gone with a couple stacked thermal pads. This doesn't look factory. This was probably done by somebody upgrading this laptop previous, or maybe it was factory, but it's pretty unusual to see the stacked thermal pads like that. Okay, so let's see what we got here. The motherboard looks like it has onboard RAM chips. So unless there's a RAM slot on the other side, the RAM is not upgradable. And you can see we have two slots for an NVMe SSD drive. So that's pretty good. You have ample storage. Looks like the fans are relatively easy to replace. It does not look like it's going to be connected to that heatsink. So if you need to replace your fans, it does look like it's going to be just a couple screws here on top and then unplugging the connector from the motherboard. So that's definitely a plus. It looks like the main stuff that you would need to replace is really easy to get to and right on top, including the battery. So it's all in all a pretty well designed laptop for replacing or upgrading parts. Let's see, and the LCD, I've had some requests for removing the LCD ahead of time, because we usually end up doing that kind of last. So let's go ahead and replace or remove the battery, and then we can go and try to remove the LCD, since that's kind of a common one to replace, a broken screen assembly. So it looks like the first thing we'll need to do is they have a plastic cover of some sort here that's overlapping the hinges, and it may be that the fan has to come out, but we'll check on that. So let's get the battery disconnected and then we'll go for that screen. Alright, so once you remove the tape, this type of battery connector, you're just going to get a fingernail on each side and just wiggle it straight out of the connector. So we have the battery disconnected, and I see a couple screws here on the back vent cover. So I'm thinking once we remove these, we might be able to get that vent cover off and have access to the hinges. Okay, it's just a little piece on each side. Okay, so when you remove a screen assembly, you want to disconnect any cables that are going to the screen first before you even try to remove the hinges. You don't want to be stuck there kind of finagling it with the screen assembly loose, trying to find where the connector goes. So it looks like there's a screen connector on this side and probably the webcam on this side and a couple Wi-Fi antennas. So once those are freed up and removed, we should be able to remove the remaining hinge screws to remove the screen assembly. So with this type of connector, we're just going to pull straight up using the handy little plastic loop they give you. And this side actually may be the webcam. But the main gist of it is to remove any cables that you see coming out of the display assembly. So it looks like it's just this one on this side. And then we'll flip it around and repeat with the other straight pop-up connector. So we got that free, and the only other two things I see are the Wi-Fi antennas. So with these, we're just going to pop them straight up and off with our fingernail. And as you can see, it looks like the screen is completely disconnected from the motherboard. And we can go ahead and remove those hinge screws. So we'll go ahead and just open up the laptop. The general rule with most screens is they need to be in a full open position. Some are partially open, but for the most part, the screen will need to be in a fully open position. And then we can remove those hinge screws. So the best way I found to do it is to remove all but one from each side. And then for the remaining two, you're going to keep your hand underneath and support both of them as you remove the last two screws. Alright, so we got the last two hinge screws out. And now we have a separated display. So it's actually pretty easy if you need to replace your screen assembly. Once you have that bottom cover off, you have easy access to both of the webcam and the video cable connectors and the two Wi-Fi antennas. And then after that, it's just a couple more hinge screws. So that's it for the display assembly. Alright, so now that we're back onto the chassis, we'll go ahead and finish removing the battery. So we've already got that connector pulled out, and we can remove the remaining battery screws. And this being a 17, they just made the battery really, really long. Alright, so once you have those screws out, The battery should just lift up and out of the case. Alright, next up we'll go ahead and start removing the Wi-Fi card and SSDs. So with the SSD, it's just going to be one screw. It's going to flip up like that, and then you just pull it straight out of the slot. This is an NVMe 2280 SSD. It looks like there's two, actually maybe three open slots for SSD storage, so definitely no problem with storage on this laptop. And we'll go ahead and repeat for the other one. Exact same, screw out and then pull it from the connector. Wi-Fi card, we've already removed the antennas when we removed the display, so we'll just need to remove the one screw. It's the same deal, it'll flip up and you just pull it out. Alright, so we'll go ahead and remove these fans. So it definitely helps to have a small tool, or at least some good fingernails for these fan connectors, because they do not give you a whole lot of meat to grip on this connector. It's really small and it's really flat, so you may need to just kind of gently work at it for a little while. It's best if you can help it not to pull on those wires because they're extremely small. So we're just going to try to get our little spudger in there. And then just back and forth. Pull a little bit on one side and go to the other, and just repeat that until the connector pops all the way out. There we go. Yeah, this is one of the more fragile fan connectors, so you definitely want to be careful. And just take your time. You don't want to kind of rush it on that, because it'll be a pain if you assemble your whole machine back up and one of your fans don't work. Okay, so we got the connector, and it looks like about 4 more small Phillips screws. And we can lift that fan up and out. These look relatively clean. Heatsink also looks clean. But if you are doing some serious gaming on this, you definitely want to get some canned air and blast it in your heatsink every once in a while. This spot right here in between the fan and the heatsink is notorious for collecting dust and hair. And what will happen is it'll get plugged up right here in these heatsink fins, and you know the fan will be blowing, but it's not going to be pushing through the heatsink and not cooling your processor. So that's one of the most common causes of a gaming laptop death, is your fans being plugged. They definitely rely on cooling a lot to cool that GPU and your processor. So keep your fans clean. All right, so we'll flip it around and repeat for the other side. So just kind of wiggle and pull on that fan connector back and forth until it pops out, and it looks like another 4 screws to remove the fan on this side. Alright, so now that we got the fans out, we can start disconnecting little bits and pieces that are connected to the motherboard. We'll go ahead and it's a little ruler. Okay, so we'll go ahead and just remove the screws for the little touchpad roller. And they've kind of got a little piece of foam over the connector, so once you pop that up and off, the connector will just kind of pop up, and then you can pull the ribbon free. It does look like the other connector is on the bottom of the motherboard. So for now, we're just going to have to disconnect this from the actual little roller here. And this type of connector, same with the fans. You're just going to need to kind of wiggle it back and forth until it pops out of there. Alright, so we'll just go along here and just start disconnecting any of the ribbons that are still connected to the motherboard. And a lot of these are just the flip up type. You'll see the one little small piece, it looks like a little gate. You just flip that up and then you can remove the ribbons. This type with the speakers, they give you some handy tabs. Just get your fingernails on that and then pull it laterally out of the connector. And I believe this cable is just a jumper, so I'm pretty sure we can just leave this attached to the motherboard, as well as the pram battery there. Alright, looks like we're mostly on that side. So for the keyboard, looks like same deal. I'll just flip up on that retainer and flip it back down. Got another one for the speakers. Just pull that out with our fingernails, and another flip up type. So once you remove the ribbons from these, if they are a flip up retainer, it's best to flip them back down. It helps them, keep from being broken. All right, quick look. Looks like we've got most of the ribbons. There is one tiny one here on the back. We'll just flip that one up and remove the ribbon. Alright, so we'll go ahead and just start removing these motherboard screws, and I'm going to switch from my 2.0 to a 2.5 Phillips. Just about any small Phillips will work on these, just as long as you don't strip the screws. Alright, so once we have those motherboard screws out, we're just going to give the motherboard some wiggling and just make sure it feels like all of the screws have come out. There is something sticky up by the heatsink, so just verify that you got the screws out, and I believe they've used some kind of adhesive up by the heat sinks. And when you remove a motherboard like this that's kind of sticking through the ports on both sides, you don't want to pry too hard. You want to just kind of give it some gentle wiggling until you get one side or the other out, because sometimes the ports on the motherboard will stick through the openings on the palm rest, and you don't want to really pry too hard upwards, because you might break those ports or your motherboard. It still feels pretty good. I think we got all the screws out. And it does look like there is one small connector still attached down here on this side. So whatever that little small piece is there, I'm just going to remove the little screws, and I can remove it with the motherboard. Okay, it looks like the headphone port. Alright, so now it looks like we have the motherboard loose, and we're just going to slowly flip it over in case there's anything we missed. It looks like everything has been disconnected. With the audio port, they do have some tape over the connector on the bottom here, so and it looks like it's basically soldered to the motherboard. So your audio port, definitely you're going to need to remove those screws before you can remove the motherboard. Alright, so we'll set the motherboard aside for a minute, and we'll just kind of look at what we have here. The speakers, looks like it's just a couple Phillips screws to remove that each speaker. And the touchpad, looks like it's just a couple small Phillips screws to remove the bracket. So it does look like the touchpad is removable. And I do see screws all along the perimeter of the keyboard, so the keyboard is also removable. Which is definitely nice. We're going to leave it in one piece. It is a backlit unit, but you definitely can replace the keyboard, touchpad, and speakers on this unit, which is definitely a good thing. So Razer Blade is still in the method of producing laptops that are upgradable. So many manufacturers now are just making everything integrated, non-removable. So on this laptop, basically the only thing you can't really upgrade is the RAM, because it is integrated to the motherboard as well as the CPU and GPU, but SSD, easy to get to, your Wi-Fi is easy to get to, your fans are easy to get to, heatsink not so much, but you know, you can't make it all perfect. So that is it for the palm rest assembly, and we'll go ahead and remove that heatsink from the motherboard. Alright, so the heatsink screws are also a small Phillips bit. I'm going to stay with the 2.5, and I see what looks like about 6 screws holding on the heatsink for the CPU and the GPU. And it does look like it's connected with this tape, so we're going to go ahead and peel this back first. And that way, hopefully, once we get those screws out, it will be easy to separate. And for the heatsink screws, it doesn't matter which order you take them out, but if you're going to reinstall with new thermal paste, you want to kind of do it in a crossways pattern. That way it'll kind of tighten down more evenly on the thermal paste, and you're not going to just kind of squeeze it all out on one side. As far as removal, it doesn't really matter. Alright, so we have these 6 screws out, and we're just gonna kind of hold the motherboard down gently with one finger and just kind of wiggle that heatsink back and forth. Make sure it feels nice and loose, and then we can get a little bit more pressure on it. And it looks like you need to slide it back slightly. Maybe not. I don't know what was catching on. I think it's just the shape of the heat sinks here. So I just kind of moved it back to free it. And as you can see, you have the CPU and GPU there. And of course, that's where you put the thermal paste. Alright, so that is it for the motherboard. This cable here is just some kind of jumper, so I would definitely recommend not removing that, just leave it in place. And of course your pram battery, you want to leave that one in place too. But otherwise, that is it for the motherboard. So that's how you disassemble the Razer Blade Pro RZ09-0166 series 17-inch gaming laptop. This one had the GTX 1080 and the 4K display. It's definitely a pretty nice laptop, and it's pretty easy to work on actually. So once you get that bottom case off, you can pretty much disassemble the internals with just a Phillips screwdriver. So I hope you liked the video. If it helped you or you found it informative, please like and subscribe. Thank you.